Hi everyone, my name is Joven, and this is going to be the first edition of my new show here on Central Valley Talk, World Watch with Joven. I'm a junior at Turlock High School, and I'm hoping to have this turn into maybe a monthly program on Central Valley Talk, where I just kind of come on here, give you a youth-oriented perspective on issues around our world, around the country, and just kind of my opinions on any sort of new developments going on. So, to kick things off, the other day I had gone back to my elementary school and I had noticed that my sixth grade classroom, it had all these new mini laptops, mini Chromebooks, which is Google's cheap, affordable way for school districts to give classrooms computers. And in addition to all these Chromebooks, I noticed there were these different robotics. So that's small robots that you could just kind of give simple commands to, and then the kids could watch the robot go around the room, maybe even give a pre-recorded message, just something like that, which I thought was really interesting. And then also, I've been noticing over the past year or two in my high school, a lot of classes have been getting these Chromebooks as well. So it got me thinking about the different opportunities that computers and all this technology can give students. So I think exposing them to electronics at an early age is definitely good for them in a lot of different respects. And so I thought I'd dedicate a little bit of time now in my first show to talk a little bit about that, maybe some other programs or anything else that we can do for these students to help them out with technology. So Silicon Valley and other small technology hubs, in New York State or all across the globe, have been hiring lots and lots more people. It's a growing industry. It's one of the biggest industries already. It's already grown tons. And a lot of these tech companies are hiring students right out of college. So they don't necessarily even need a master's degree. They could get away with just a bachelor's. And I think Google's also been known to hire a few people who have actually never even gone to college, and then small startups would most likely also be able to hire a few of those as well. So according to Business Insider, the starting pay for a lot of computer science jobs actually is greater than the national average household income. So we can see that, this is a huge opportunity for all sorts of students everywhere, that if they do want to go into an industry where they can hopefully get a steady pay and do something that interests them, computer science might be the way to go for them. And even if they necessarily did not want to go into computer science as an industry, having some sort of computer science knowledge could definitely help in other industries as well. For example, in the financial sector, if you're good with maybe Microsoft Excel and making spreadsheets and any sort of work that might make your life in the financial sector easier, this can go a long way to helping you get a job. This can also help in education. If you want to become a teacher, having these skills, as I was talking about a little earlier, as technology becomes more and more present in our schools, then having some sort of computer skills will definitely give you a leg up on the competition. And also, if you're hoping to be an engineer, that's another field where having computer skills might help you. So in addition to the technology industry, where more and more jobs, by the thousands in fact, are being open each year for computer science applicants, there's also many other industries that also accept people with computer science skills. All these sorts of large corporations always want to get a leg up on other corporations, and a great way to do that is by hiring people with more skills, namely computer science, in addition to whatever industry that corporation is in. And also, in addition to just employment help, knowing computer programming or anything like that is also very helpful to just increasing one's intellectual capabilities. There's a quote from Bill Gates a few years back, and he actually said, "Learning to write programs stretches your mind, helps you think better, and creates a way of thinking about things that I think is helpful in all domains." The American Psychological Association actually conducted a study a year or two ago that said that learning computer programming, especially at a younger age, in your formative years, favorably affects cognitive thinking. In this study, the students who had been exposed to computer programming a few years earlier actually scored 16 points higher than students who had not been exposed to cognitive thinking. And then obviously all these students aren't going to go into computer science, but again, just having those kinds of skills is going to help them no matter what field they go into. And so anyway, reading all these statistics and facts really got me thinking about, how can we then expand technology exposure to students in younger schools, K through 12, but namely elementary, middle school, but then also high school. So one thing that I found interesting was a 2016 USA Today study, which found out that 64% of high schoolers have absolutely no opportunities for computer science in their K through 12 schools. So that means no small computer programming classes, no clubs, no other activities that teachers might be starting up. And, it's obviously something very sad to think about, just because all the new jobs that are opening up in this field, all these new opportunities that these students could be getting, 64% of them currently just can't get those opportunities due to no fault of their own, just the fact that their school districts, aren't providing them with these opportunities. So, even in my own Turlock High School, Turlock definitely isn't a huge town, but compared to other small agricultural towns, we're the second biggest in Stanislaus County after Modesto. And even at Turlock High School, which is the biggest high school in the region, we only have 2 computer science classes that I can think of, and only one of them is an advanced placement course. And the reason why I bring that up is just because, colleges more and more are looking for those honors and advanced placement classes. And if students are taking time away from taking those classes for maybe a normal computer science class, that could end up hurting them if they want to go to a top-tier college that might not have wanted them to do something like that. So, yeah, even at my high school, one of the biggest in the region, we also do not have too many of these opportunities. And then another fact that I found interesting was that over 20 states do not allow computer programming classes to count towards high school graduation credits. So even if all these schools do have computer programming classes so that these kids are getting these opportunities, not as many students are going to take them just because it's not going to count towards graduation credit. And you might be thinking that, interested students are going to take it no matter what. But the problem is, we don't necessarily want young people to be so set in their mind that they only take a few related classes and completely have their mind up. They're not open-minded enough to consider maybe going into other fields or other things that they're interested in. We want students to take all the different classes that they can that might even just barely interest them, but maybe once after they take this class, they're going to fall in love with this class and this subject and want to pursue it as a career maybe. Or even if they don't want to pursue it as a career, just, a hobby off to the side or anything that, interests them. We want to be encouraging that mindset amongst young students. So I thought it was really disheartening to find that even schools that do offer these opportunities, they don't count for any graduation credits. So in 2014 in Kentucky and also in 2016 in Florida, there was a piece of legislation that was introduced to the state legislatures that I thought was also very interesting. So it was a bill to amend the public university requirements of the state to allow programming language classes to count for foreign language requirements. So here in California, for example, I believe UCs require 2 years of a foreign language and recommend 3. So if this bill were to be passed in California, that would mean that instead of 2 to 3 years of a foreign language, students could also satisfy that requirement by taking 2 or 3 years of Python or Java or some sort of computer language. I thought this was really interesting because if you think about just the whole concept of a foreign language class, it's for our increasingly globalized world. As cultures come together, as countries become more and more of a melting pot with more diversity, then, it's nice to know different languages so that you can connect to more people. And so if you apply that same concept to programming languages, you can see that since computers are, everywhere in the world, and in the places that they're not, there's tons of programs to get technology to those regions of the world without technology. Um, so as all these regions become more dependent on technology, programming is a way to, I guess, connect the world in a different regard. So if foreign languages are just a way to connect with them verbally, this is through the World Wide Web, through the internet. Obviously, it's not, in like texting or emailing, you're not going to send somebody something in a programming language, but it is communication in a different regard that I think should be encouraged. And so these bills in the Kentucky and Florida state legislature, they did not pass, which I thought was very disappointing because, I don't think this is a partisan issue that, Republicans might support and Democrats might not, or Democrats might support and Republicans might not. This is a bipartisan thing, or nonpartisan, I guess I should say, that we do need to increase computer literacy amongst youth, encourage them to take programming classes, whether it's to encourage them to take a career in this, again, growing industry, more jobs, or just to expose them to different fields. This is something to be encouraged. It's not a partisan issue. I was disappointed to see that these bills failed, and I wanted to read a little bit more about why they might have failed. And so I read that groups of foreign language teachers vehemently opposed this bill, because they were saying that this would encourage less and less people to take foreign language classes, and they said that programming languages corresponded more with math and science, and if you're going to include programming languages in public university requirements, it should be the math and science requirements that are amended and not foreign languages. However, after reading this, I also read a very interesting study, a joint study, in fact, by Carnegie Mellon University and the Georgia Institute of Technology, which was in response to, developments like this legislation. So they found by using MRI scanning that the part of our brain that's used when programming computers is actually the one that's most commonly associated with using different languages, as in using multiple languages. So we can see that calling both programming language and foreign language, it's more than just a name, that they actually do have concrete similarities. So if we go by what part of the brain is used for programming languages, it's actually closer to foreign languages and not math and science. Even though, computer science has the word science in it, a bit misleading there. And so, yeah, I think it was really disheartening to hear then that these bills in Kentucky and Florida had failed to pass. I'm hoping that with a growing computer science lobby, the companies that I mentioned earlier who are hiring right out of college, with a growing lobby, then they can lobby different state legislatures around the country to have their own similar bills like this, especially, here in California with Silicon Valley, and maybe we can get these bills passed in more states. And then, so one other thing of note that I wanted to talk about in relation to this computer science development is that even if you don't have access to computer science classes or activities, again, the USA Today poll or study that said 64% of high schoolers do not, as well as the 20-plus states which do not count towards graduation credit. So even if that is your situation, you might not be able to take this in schools. There are a lot of different opportunities then for people of all ages to get involved in computer science. There have been a lot of stories in recent years where people in their 50s, people in their 40s, suddenly actually quit their day jobs and go into computer science for a career just because on their own time they started learning a programming language or learning something to do with technology, fell in love with it, and realized that they still could make a career out of it. So while I'm definitely not recommending that people, quit their day jobs, the ones they have worked for, to go into computer science, I just thought it was of note that, people of all ages can still start learning computer science, see if it's something that appeals to them. For example, my dad, who's certainly not involved in computer science, he loves, on his own time, looking at things like 3D printers or just different, robots, artificial intelligence, and he might not be actually programming, but he's reading about new technologies and things that he's interested in on his own time. So some resources for learning computer programming on your own time might be something like code.org or Code Academy. So code.org is known for its famous Hour of Code, which has been endorsed by tons of celebrities, athletes, visionaries, CEOs. And basically it allows for anyone to just hop on a computer for an hour and just start coding by doing simple little procedures like maybe having a character navigate some sort of obstacle course where he has to maneuver around anything, and then you, the person doing the hour of code, drags and drops these different blocks that give their character different commands. So it'll tell you, go left to avoid this, go straight for 5 spaces, and just something like that. So it's pretty straightforward, but, if you do that hour of code and it's something that really appeals to you, then Code.org has other programs that you might also be interested in. That's where something like Code Academy comes into play, which offers small courses in a few different programming languages. And then also just taking classes at your local junior college or local university. Living in Turlock, about half-hour away is Modesto Junior College, and then also here in Merced, there's Merced Junior College, and there's a lot of junior colleges that will have classes for all ages to maybe just take a class for a month in something like Python or Java, 2 different programming languages. Another opportunity to learn more about technology in general and not just computer programming is just even going to the library and seeing anything that they might have. Libraries do have a lot of things other than just, books. They might have movies, TV shows, etc. And one thing that I've noticed mine does in Turlock is have DVDs of little tutorials or little courses. And I'm sure if you looked hard enough, you could find one in computer science. You could check out a book on technology that maybe was recently published and is up to date on different developments in the tech world. And just maybe take advantage of the fact that, we're in California, Central Valley. We're right next to Silicon Valley, which, computer technology capital of the world. And so, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities that we can take advantage of. But the problem that I wanted to bring up with Code.org, with Code Academy, with university classes and checking out books from the library is student-specific. Because the problem with a lot of students is, number one, motivation. Do they really want to be going in after school when they're already doing all this homework and learning even more? That's the problem that, plagues a lot of students, whether it's for computer science or just anything. Why should I do this? The motivation problems that I'm sure everybody faces. And also the fact that, many of them lack time. And this one's not just student-specific. Just because, for students, if it's after doing all this homework, if it's after an 8-hour school day and they still have homework, do they really have time to do something like this if they still want to get a good amount of sleep? And then also for adults, after a long day's work, you don't necessarily want to do something that you might also consider work. And so that's another reason why I think we need to increase computer science exposure in schools, just because even if you do want to learn, if you can't find the time, then you might not be able to. So if you do have the time in school, then a lot more people would be taking these courses. And also just a simple fact of having someone for guidance who's an expert in this subject, having them to help you, you're going to learn, you're probably going to learn more than you would just doing it alone. If you develop some bad habits while programming alone, then you have a greater chance of keeping those bad habits if you have nobody watching over you and suggesting that, oh, hey, you might want to stop doing this and do this instead. Because, it's just a simple principle that everything is easier with a little guidance. And so, yeah, I thought that would be an interesting thing to talk about for my first segment of World Watch with Joven, that increasing computer science opportunities and just a little discussion about technology. Welcome back to World Watch with Joven. This is again my first ever show, first ever edition of World Watch with Joven on Central Valley Talk. Again, I'm hoping to turn this into a monthly series here. And so today is January 5th, 2018. Wow, it feels weird to be saying 2018. And since it's so close to the new year, I wanted to use this time then to talk about some developments from last year, namely relating to culture. So, for example, movies, TV shows, music, and that sort of thing. So just kind of delving right into it then with maybe some TV shows I thought of note. One show that came out, I believe it was January 13th, Friday the 13th of January 2017, was A Series of Unfortunate Events. This was a book series that I grew up reading. It's one of my all-time favorites. For those of you who don't know, it is a self-deprecating series with the author who plays a character. His real name's Daniel Handler. He pretends to be Lemony Snicket, this character he's concocted. And so this narrator, Lemony Snicket, it's very dark humor, black humor kind of thing, self-deprecating. The narrator repeatedly warns the reader that you don't want to read this book series. It's unfortunate series of unfortunate events. It's full of misery. You don't want to read this. I suggest you read something more pleasant. Why are you reading this in your free time? So it's a funny little self-deprecating kind of series like that. And so Netflix actually released a television adaptation in January of last year. And so it's the second adaptation of A Series of Unfortunate Events. About a decade ago, there was a movie that had Meryl Streep in it. It had Jim Carrey in it. The movie did not get that great of a reception among fans just because it combined 3 books into one movie, which might be a recipe for disaster. By itself, it was definitely a good movie, but if you're trying to compare it to the books and see how faithful it was to the books, then you might think it falls short. So the TV series that came out last January on Netflix was 8 episodes long, the first season. It covered 4 books, and it had 2 episodes per book, about 40 minutes to an hour for each episode. And personally, I loved it. It had Neil Patrick Harris of How I Met Your Mother fame as the main character, and then it had 3 child actors playing the 3 children. So I thought this was a much more faithful adaptation to the books, as the movie was a little over a decade ago. I really liked the fact that it had between an hour and a half and 2 hours altogether for each book that it was covering. 2 hours of 40 minutes to an hour long, and so hour and a half to 2 hours per book. I thought this was a perfect amount of time to give to each book, and it allowed for a few additions to be made to the TV series to keep it kind of fresh to people who already knew what was going to happen. This allowed them to add new things because the writer of the book series, he was also an advisor on the TV show, and so they added a few things that they thought really fit the themes and the spirit of the books into the TV show. And I thought they did this perfectly. Season 2 of this show is coming out in, I believe, March or April of this year. We'll see if they release it on another Friday the 13th like they did of last year. Another TV show of note that came out last year, also on Netflix, was 13 Reasons Why. And so this was also an adaptation of a book series. Book, not a book series. It followed a pretty heavy topic of a girl who commits suicide. She's a high schooler, and so, as I'm sure you can imagine, this ignited sparked tons of controversy from people who thought that this show kind of glorified teen suicide, whereas others felt that it gave an accurate representation of an issue that needs to be talked about. So that show, 13 Reasons Why, as well as a popular song that was released last year with the Suicide Hotline as the title of the song, I think did a great job of increasing suicide awareness, because, it's not something a lot of people think about it, but it does plague thousands each year. And, promoting the suicide hotline number is, I think, a great thing, because this hotline features people who are willing to talk to people committing suicide. The people committing suicide might not have somebody they can really talk to, and it's great that we're promoting this hotline that hopefully allows the people on the other end of the telephone to really connect with someone and, not commit suicide. Another big television event of last year was Game of Thrones Season 7. I believe it's the most watched series internationally currently. It's on HBO. And this show is also one that's had tons of controversy in the past because it takes place in what's sort of a medieval period in time. And so women are, not really portrayed as equals to men. It does feature a few characters, a few very strong female characters who kind of defy the normal stereotypes of that era and go their own way, forge their own path, which is great. But it has had controversy in the past for things like rape, which it did depict in the show, and a lot of other very suggestive content that, again, sparked tons of controversy, but it remains the most watched show internationally. The next season, Season 8, won't be premiering till 2019, in fact. And this is another adaptation of a popular book series. And all of the 3 TV series I mentioned so far are adaptations of book series. And so it did get slightly worse reviews than previous seasons, just because the book series it's based on has not been completed. And so the writers and the showrunners of the TV series didn't have somebody else's material to adapt like they had in previous seasons. They had to write a lot of the material on their own. They had talked to the author about, a basic roadmap of what was going to happen later in the book series, and they were able to incorporate a lot of that into the TV show as far as we know. But they did also have to make up a lot of their own events, and now the series is officially diverged from the books. We don't know if they're going to end the same way, if they're going to end differently, and for all we know, they're not going to kind of cross over again. But yeah, so it did get slightly worse reviews from people who thought that it wasn't necessarily in the spirit of the book series, and that a lot of the things that were going on in there wouldn't have appeared in the book series, and that it just wasn't plausible, like the story-wise. Visual effects-wise, it had a budget of, I think, around $10 million per episodes, possibly even more, which HBO is able to do because, again, most watched show in the world. And so it features dragons, explosions, wall hundreds of feet high, and all these sorts of CGI, computer-generated imagery that cost millions, as well as the 5 primary actors received, I believe it was around $2 million per episode, so they're going to be set financially for a while. And so, yeah, it was a big television event that happened this last year that I thought was of note. Another thing of note that I wanted to talk about television-wise was, I believe it was on Fox, but it also might have been NBC. A few weeks ago, there was A Christmas Story, A Christmas Story Live, with the musical version of the popular movie A Christmas Story. And so it was just another one in a trend of television networks holding these musical events. So either staging their own reenactment of this musical featuring, movie stars, or just showing a recorded Broadway musical. So I thought it was interesting just because, in previous years, when they've done this with Grease and a lot of other famous musicals on television networks like ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, it's garnered a lot more publicity. But what I think a lot of people don't know is that on PBS, the public broadcasting station, so government funded, they've actually been doing this for years now. They'll have they'll show currently airing Broadway musicals, Broadway musicals that ended a while back, musicals from the West End in the United Kingdom, in London, and just a lot of different musicals that they think is interesting and relates to the American cultural lexicon. And so I thought it was interesting that, that hadn't garnered as much publicity when they've already been doing this for years. And so I'd encourage any of you who might be interested in watching these musicals or plays or anything like that to check out PBS and see what offerings they have. Another television event that I wanted to talk about, development over the past year, is The Crown Season 2, which premiered just a few weeks ago in December. It was the second season of The Crown, also premiered on Netflix, just like the first season, and it follows the Queen of England and her husband, her sisters, her uncle, her mother, and that whole host of characters. So it is based off of Queen Elizabeth II, the currently reigning British monarch. However, this season takes place in the, I believe, late 1950s and also early 1960s. And then also possibly the mid-1960s and the rest of that decade. Because this show, it's aiming to have 6 seasons, and it'll have a whole entire new cast every 2 seasons, which I thought was interesting, because each season is supposed to represent a decade in the Queen of England's life. So she's been queen for over 70 years now, and so series is going to cover at least 60 of those years. So the previous season featured the end of World War II and had Winston Churchill in it and other historical figures from that time period. It had Queen Elizabeth's uncle, who actually should have been the king instead of her, but he was forced to abdicate his throne because he had married an American divorcee, which was, taboo at the time in the UK. And so he was forced to abdicate his throne to his brother, and then his brother ended up dying at a pretty young age. I believe it was in his 50s, and so the throne then passed to his eldest daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. And so that's what season 1 of the show focused on, this whole transition from King George to Queen Elizabeth II. And it had the uncle, the former king, showing up a lot. It had Winston Churchill showing up in it. And I believe it was nominated for a ton of awards at the Golden Globes and Emmys. And then season 2 of it premiered just a few weeks back. And so that was the final season with this cast. It's going to have a whole new cast just because since it's going to take place 10 years later, season 3 is going to take place 10 years later, which would be 20 years after the show officially started. Then they're going to need actors and actresses who look older because all of the characters, are going to be 20 years older. So I thought this was interesting that, this show kept the same storyline going but had a whole new cast. I can't really think of too many shows that have done that. There are a lot of anthology series like American Horror Story, Fargo, American Crime Story, the O.J. Simpson one that premiered last year, where it's the same show, but it's a whole new story and a whole new cast each year. But The Crown is different in that it's the same story, but totally different cast. So I thought, again, interesting way to show things. So season 2 of The Crown received amazing reviews, just like season 1. It's one of Netflix's most expensive shows for the 13 episodes in the season. The budget's over $100 million, and I'm sure you could see why if you check out the show, just because the costume design, the whole sets and places they're filming, you can see why it costs that much. Another television show that released, I believe, 2 seasons last year was Fuller House, so a revival of Full House. And this was also on Netflix. I think you're kind of noticing a trend here with a lot of these new shows being Netflix only. And so Fuller House is reportedly one of Netflix's most watched series. It's a nostalgia factor. So people who might have tuned into the original Full House decades ago are now tuning into the sequel, Fuller House. And then it's also targeting a whole new audience maybe high schoolers like myself who have never seen Full House before or have seen reruns of it before, and now they're watching the sequel come out, Fuller House. And so also it's interesting just again that a lot of the TV shows I've mentioned that premiered in the past year have been Netflix only. And there's a growing trend of this, whether it's on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. A lot of content creators are going to Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime just because it provides them more creative freedom. They're free to show everything the way they want it, and if they want, they can release all the episodes at once. If they don't want to, they can do it weekly. I believe Netflix's, all of theirs come out at once, so you don't have to wait each week for a new episode, and of course no commercials in between. But Hulu, another major streaming service, which is owned by Disney, it's owned by NBC, Comcast, and it's owned by CBS and Time Warner. So a lot of the companies that own normal cable channels, they're going into streaming now with Hulu. And actually one of Hulu's original shows last year, The Handmaid's Tale, was the first ever streaming series to win a Golden Globe for Best Series. It won Best Drama Series. No streaming only TV show has ever won Best Comedy Series, but I'm sure we'll see one of them do so in the years to come. And so yeah, I think it's interesting that a lot of these shows now are going to be Netflix only or Hulu only or Amazon Prime only. A big one that premiered on Amazon Prime a few weeks ago was The Grand Tour Season 2, which was the second season of a show that's meant to replace Top Gear, which was a British show, BBC, show that followed three men and them testing different cars around on different, terrains, different climates, with humor involved, and they're testing these cars against each other and maybe seeing which are the fastest or just which are their favorite models. And they travel around the world doing this, looking at different countries' cars and all that. So that show Top Gear, these three individuals, one of them was fired, and the rest then followed suit and they left the show. And so they went to Amazon Prime, where they now have the Grand Tour. Grand Tour Season 2 premiered just a few weeks ago. And that's an example of a streaming show that comes out each week. So, for example, there's only been a few episodes of Season 2 that have come out so far, and the rest will be coming out in the weeks to come. So if you did like that feel of, waiting every week, maybe on that Friday night or that Thursday night to see the next episode of your favorite TV show, you can still get that with some shows, namely the Grand Tour. And yeah, so I thought those are just some interesting developments in the television world. And movies-wise, there were also many great movies that came from Hollywood, from independent filmmakers that came out this year. One of my favorite was actually War for the Planet of the Apes. You hear Planet of the Apes and you might not be thinking amazing movie, but this new trilogy of the Planet of the Apes, it started in 2011, and the third film, War for the Planet of the Apes, premiered in 2017. It's a very interesting movie series to me because you might think of these action movies as nothing really special, but I feel that these Planet of the Apes movies definitely are, because it brings up a lot of, philosophical questions, not only questions, but just dilemmas in that regard with this whole war between the apes and the humans. It brings up all these moral questions, especially in the previous one, this final one, War for the Planet of the Apes. There were a lot of dilemmas, ethical dilemmas, that I think us audience also had to kind of answer to. So just some food for thought for us there. Another movie that premiered this past summer, Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan, director of The Dark Knight, director of Inception, Interstellar. His latest movie, Dunkirk, is focusing on the Dunkirk evacuation in World War II, which was off the coast of France. 300,000 French and British soldiers were able to successfully evacuate. And though they did feature thousands upon thousands of casualties, it's a remarkable achievement that in real life that they were able to evacuate in the first place without being killed by the Nazis, because the Nazis did have the land portion surrounded. They were closing in on Dunkirk, but with the help of a lot of British civilians, the Dunkirk soldiers were able to evacuate. And so, to that point about civilians, so a lot of British civilians then, who maybe owned a boat or a yacht or anything like that, they actually sailed it themselves to Dunkirk. In real life, this is completely true, to pick up soldiers. So they essentially risked their lives going into a war zone, and they were not soldiers themselves, but they picked up these soldiers because they thought it was the right thing to do. These people are in need of our help. They're defending our country, and now we have a chance to help them, to thank them. And so that was one of the things that this movie, Dunkirk, focused on. And so it was an interesting movie just because, so it had 3 different settings. So it followed characters in the air, so pilots. It followed some of the soldiers themselves trapped on Dunkirk. And it also followed British civilians who were coming to help out these soldiers. So it had 3 different timelines with the air, the pilots, the civilians, and the soldiers not all meeting until the end of the movie. It had 3 different timelines because the pilots only had an hour's flight to Dunkirk. The soldiers obviously were there. They were there for a week, actually. And then it took a day for the civilians to sail there. So it had 3 different timelines, an hour, a day, and a week. And then it was very neat to see how it all converged at the end. Another interesting thing about that movie is that it didn't necessarily focus too much on any one character. So, it obviously did have main characters, but a lot of times we wouldn't even know these characters' names. We wouldn't know too much about them. We would just kind of see what they're doing, see how they're trying to escape or save people, but we wouldn't know their background, know anything about them, really. And so I thought that was really interesting to see in a war movie, just because, we're not necessarily rooting for this one soldier to find his way back home or for this one soldier to be the hero and save all the other ones. No, we're kind of supporting all these soldiers at once and, again, kind of treating them equally in that regard and not necessarily looking at just one specifically or anything like that. So I thought it was an interesting story choice, and, I like seeing this originality in these Hollywood movies. And then, so another big movie of the summer was Baby Driver, which had Jamie Foxx in it. It had Kevin Spacey, who the allegations against Kevin Spacey and his downfall didn't come out till months later. Baby Driver, so yeah, featured Kevin Spacey, Jamie Foxx, John Hamm, Ansel Elgort, and so it was a kind of an homage to like classic action movies or like heist films, but it also kind of gave a new take on this genre, which I thought was an interesting story choice. And so that was one of the most successful movies of the summer critically, and then it also did very well at the box office. And so, it's nice to see that a lot of these original movies, whether it's Dunkirk, which isn't original in the sense that, like, the story's completely new, because it was based off a real-life event, but original in the sense that, it wasn't there to pander. It was very different than other big-budget Hollywood movies, so it's nice to see movies like Baby Driver, Dunkirk, or even Planet of the Apes come out in today's Hollywood. We also saw movies like Wonder Woman, featuring a female superhero for the first time in a major film. We saw movies like It, which I believe came out in September. And this is another adaptation of Stephen King and his famous novel with Pennywise the Clown. We saw, and then also the Me Too movement that started in about October with Harvey Weinstein and the bombshell accusations against him and all the women he had sexually harassed. And so that, kind of turned this entertainment industry upside down, because we see people and we see actors and hosts of television series that we've loved for years, whether it's Kevin Spacey, whether it's Charlie Rose, whether it's Kevin Spacey, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, and a lot of other different celebrities. We just saw their downfall then, which obviously it's very great that they did see their downfall, but at the same time it's disheartening that they did this stuff decades ago, and they're only getting punished for it now. A lot of times, because in the case of people like Harvey Weinstein, it's things that weren't necessarily secret. It's been reported over and over again about how tons of people did know about Harvey Weinstein's actions, or even if they didn't know for a fact, they had heard rumors but had, done nothing about them. It's kind of disheartening to hear that, even though it is obviously good that we'll be getting justice. And then so as a result of all this, the Me Too movement came out, where people all over on Twitter and other social media would use the hashtag #MeToo to say that, yes, they had been sexually harassed at some point in their life. And, this is obviously a great thing that we should be encouraging, because a lot of these victims, they've been silent for years just because they're scared of the responses. And the problem there is that because of people like Harvey Weinstein, famous movie producer, so he had power over individuals, and you could see this with a lot of the other people who were accused of sexual harassment, that they used their power, their stature as such an influential or popular, rich, whatever you want to say, individual. They were able to hold that against somebody and coerce them into, doing something with them. And so, yeah, that's the kind of common trend that we could see throughout a lot of these incidents. And then another development over the past year relating to movies is that it was far less movie tickets were sold this year than previous years, and movie theaters have been gaining a lot less profit. Their revenues have been dropping. And part of that is because of companies like Netflix. So Netflix's original movies, they don't put them in movie theaters, they only put it on Netflix. And then so with even movies that have been in theaters, with them being on streaming, in just a few months, a lot more people are, waiting to just watch it on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, or just getting Redbox to watch these movies, so less and less people are going to the movie theater. But then we also see a very different type of movie theater spreading. So you might have heard of these luxury theaters, which have food service, they have waiters, they have reclining seats. You can reserve your seat hours beforehand, as in, I want in the 10th row, I want the 8th seat. You can reserve your seat. And a lot of these luxury theaters are expanding more and more. And so it'll be interesting to see then, with the drop in people going to the movie theater, will these luxury theaters be able to survive that? It's also interesting just because of this past year, Movie Pass became popular, which is a monthly flat fee you pay, and then you can go to the movie theater once a day without paying any extra. So it's sort of like Netflix or Hulu in that regard, where you just have a flat fee and then you can watch however much you want, provided for Movie Pass that you only go once a day. So it's actually very cheap. It's only about $10 a month. 10 or might have been raised to 20 at this point. So it's only the cost of, one or two movie tickets, but you could technically see 31 that month if you so wanted to. And so, yeah, I thought those are just some interesting developments in culture the past year with movies and television, and I thought it'd be nice to share that with you all. Hi again, welcome back to World Watch with Joven, my first ever edition of this show on Central Valley Talk, hoping again to make it a monthly appearance here at Central Valley Talk. And so, again, since it's only the first week of January, I thought it'd be interesting to reflect on a lot of developments over the past year. So in the previous segment, I talked a lot about, the culture, television, and movies. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about developments in this next segment. So music-wise, so more culture, we did see three different albums of note that I'd like to talk about. We saw Taylor Swift's new album, Reputation, come out a few months back, which was interesting because it's her first album since her drama with Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, and Katy Perry. And so it did get good reviews by critics, not as good necessarily as previous albums, but it did get good reviews for her being more personal and open, in that she addressed a lot of the drama numerous times, in fact, and actually about most of the songs in the album related to all the drama and things that she's been involved in. And so she addressed those head on. And so, again, it was interesting to hear a little more personal album by, one of the biggest artists out there. And, hopefully we see more of these sorts of personal albums by other big artists in the following years to come. Another album that I wanted to talk about was Lorde's album, Melodrama, which was her second album ever. She's still only 20 years old. And she, first became famous a few years back for her popular song Royals. So when she was only 17, she came out of New Zealand and became a global star. And so even like music legends like David Bowie actually called her the future of music. So while I necessarily might not go that far, I did think her album this year, was amazing. It got nominated for Grammys for Album of the Year. Melodrama was, again, a very personal album. So it had themes of, acceptance, rejection, loneliness, and a lot of other things. I encourage everyone to check it out. Another interesting album of note that came out the last year was Kendrick Lamar's Damn album. Also nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys this upcoming February. And so this is only his third album, but he's already solidified himself in lots of people's minds, especially in the music industry, as, one of the greatest hip-hop artists of the past decade. And we'll see if he can end up being one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time by the time he's done. And so this was another album of his that featured a lot of commentary on social justice issues and his opinion of different issues plaguing America, whether it's racial issues, whether it's gender issues, economic issues, and just things like that. And so, yeah, those are the three albums I wanted to talk about music-wise. Other developments over the past year, obviously there were devastating hurricanes. It was the most devastating hurricane season in years. And it affected Puerto Rico, it affected Florida, it affected Texas. In Texas, we had Hurricane Harvey. It caused 91 deaths and $200 billion in damages, which is, I believe, the most since Hurricane Katrina over a decade ago. There was Hurricane Maria in Florida. I believe it was over 130 people died in that one. And that caused over $65 billion in damages. And then we had Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And there, it was the worst ever disaster of any type, whether it's hurricane or any other disaster. It was the worst of all time in Puerto Rico. It caused 550 people to lose their lives. It was the deadliest out of all of the hurricanes this year. So it was the deadliest in a very deadly season. People in Puerto Rico, still, a lot of them still do not have internet. There's still food shortages. There's actually I guess we could call him an American hero of sorts this past year. His name's Jose Andres. So he's actually from Washington, D.C., but he has this charity that he's a cook, and he has this charity that gives food to people in natural disasters. So this past year, he assembled a team of, I believe it was a few dozen people, and took all the resources they had to Puerto Rico, and he's been there for months now, cooking thousands upon thousands of meals, all of them together for Puerto Ricans, which I thought was amazing. Another American hero again. And another development over the past year that I thought would be interesting to talk about, this was mainly in the news the past month or two, was Bitcoin. So for those of you who don't know, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. So it's it's its own currency. It's not necessarily related to the US dollar. It's not on the gold standard, anything like that. It basically works the same way, I guess you could say, any currency does at face value. So if you're just talking about currencies in general, their worth is determined by, how much people want them and how much they're willing to use them. So Bitcoin is being accepted in thousands of retailers now across the world. It's been out for about, I believe, 8 years now, or 9 years now. It's 2018, since 2009. And it reached a high of $10,000 in early December. And people were saying that, one Bitcoin could not be worth more than $10,000, that it's going to drop after this. But lo and behold, it kept on increasing. And I believe right now it's around 14 or 15,000 after reaching highs of 17,000, goes to 20,000. And so it'll be interesting to see how big of a part these cryptocurrencies then play in our society, because obviously we all use the US dollar, but we'll have to see then whether these cryptocurrencies can shake anything up. Another development of note over the past year, sporting wise, was the Patriots in the Super Bowl, coming back, being down 25 points, 28-3 during the early part of the third quarter, and then coming back and actually winning the Super Bowl. So, that was pleasure to watch. And even if you're not a Patriots fan, I'm sure you can admit that it was amazing to watch possibly the greatest quarterback of all time complete this comeback. We saw in basketball the Warriors beat the Cavaliers for the second time in 3 years in the NBA Finals and beat them in only 5 games. So for much of the playoffs, the Warriors were undefeated. They were beating the Cavs 3-0 before they lost Game 4, and they won in Game 5 then, clinching the title for them. And so they only lost 1 game throughout the entire playoffs, and we'll see what they can do then this year. And so, I thought they were just some of the top developments over the past year. I wanted to use this first show to reflect on the previous year, just because, again, super early in 2018. And, I thought that was going to be some interesting things to talk about. I've been enjoying this first show of mine, World Watch with Joven, here on Central Valley Talk. I like to make this a monthly series. Thank you all again for watching. And I hope you'll tune in next time I appear on the show as well.